So, usually when you get a medical diagnosis, it's pretty binary.
Right, yeah.
Like you break an arm, you go to the doctor, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor points right at it.
Broken or not broken, it's obvious.
Exactly. It's clean, it's visible, and it's easily categorized. But when you take a highly trained operative and they cross into hostile territory in the dead of night.
It's a whole different story.
Right. The x-ray machine of international law and government oversight is just completely broken. It does not work.
Oh, absolutely. It shatters.
Because when that operative starts moving through the shadows, you have to ask, what dictates whether their actions are legally sanctioned?
Who is secretly paying for it out of some black budget?
Yes, and perhaps most importantly, which committee in Washington, D.C. actually gets told that they are even out there?
Well, I mean, the lines aren't just blurred. In many cases, they are intentionally designed to be completely indistinguishable.
It's wild to think about.
It is, but modern statecraft and modern warfare require this incredibly tight integration between military forces and intelligence agencies.
Right.
But our legal systems and, our political oversight structures, they still really struggle to categorize these actions. I mean, we are essentially running 21st century operations on a mid-20th century legal chassis.
That's so true. So today, we're asking you, our listener, to step into the shoes of a master's-level military strategy expert. We're going on a deep dive.
A very deep dive.
Yeah, we are wading into the murky, incredibly high-stakes world of unconventional warfare. Specifically, we're focusing on the friction between covert action and clandestine activities.
Which are two terms people confuse all the time.
All the time. So to make sure we speak clearly and really break down the facts for you, we are grounding our analysis in two foundational texts.
Right. We have to start with the source material.
Exactly. First, we have a Congressional Research Service report by Michael Lee Devine. It's titled Covert Action and Clandestine Activities of the Intelligence Community.
Great report.
And second, we're looking at a really comprehensive article from the Harvard National Security Journal.
Right, by Andrew E. Wall.
Yes, titled Demystifying the Title 10, Title 50 Debate, Distinguishing Military Operations, Intelligence Activities, and Covert Action.
And, those sources are so critical because they bypass all the Hollywood versions of espionage.
No James Bond here.
Right. No Aston Martins. They get straight to the statutory and doctrinal realities of how this stuff actually works. Like I said, people throw around the words covert and clandestine like they're just synonyms for secret.
Right, like they mean the exact same thing.
Exactly. But the Devine report makes it explicitly clear that in the eyes of the United States government, they are profoundly different tools. And they have vastly different legal tripwires.
So let's pull apart that distinction right now. According to the Devine text, covert action isn't just a descriptive adjective.
No, it's a very rigid statutory category.
Right, it's defined in Title 50 of the United States Code. And the law basically states that covert action is an activity of the United States government meant to influence political, economic, or military conditions abroad.
But here's the kicker.
Right, where it is intended that the role of the United States will not be apparent or acknowledged publicly.
The operative word in all of that is influence.
Influence, okay, unpack that.
It is about actively changing the environment. You are trying to shift the geopolitical reality on the ground.
So like swaying an election.
Swaying an election, funding a specific political faction, maybe destabilizing a regime entirely.
Wow.
Because the goal is to alter the state of affairs in a foreign nation while totally hiding the sponsor. The political risks are just astronomical.
Right, because if you get caught.
If a covert action is traced back to the United States, it can trigger major diplomatic crises, or, even war.
Which explains the massive bureaucratic hurdle you need to jump over just to execute one of these operations.
Oh, it's a huge hurdle.
The text emphasizes that covert action requires a written presidential finding.
Not just a verbal, okay.
Right, the president literally has to put pen to paper, formally stating that this specific unacknowledged operation is necessary to support identifiable foreign policy objectives.
It completely bypasses the lower-level commander.
It goes straight to the commander-in-chief. And even then, they can't just, lock the document in a safe and pretend it didn't happen.
No, absolutely not.
They have to notify the Congressional Intelligence Committees.
Yeah.
Or, in really extreme cases, they notify the Gang of Eight, which is the top congressional leaders.
And that notification process is highly, highly structured. I mean, the intelligence committees expect to be briefed, ideally, before the covert action even commences.
They want a heads up.
Exactly. And there's also a strict domestic prohibition here. You cannot use a Title 50 covert action to influence United States public opinion or our policies or our media.
So it's strictly an outward-facing instrument.
100%. It's an instrument of foreign policy.
Okay, so that's covert action. Let's pivot to clandestine operations.
Right, the other side of the coin.
The divine text notes that, unlike covert action, the word clandestine isn't strictly defined in federal statute.
No, it's more of a doctrinal term.
Right, used by the Department of Defense. They define it as an operation conducted in such a way as to assure secrecy or tactical concealment.
And the really crucial distinction there lies in what exactly is being hidden.
Okay, explain that.
Well, with covert action, the sponsor is hidden, right? But the result is entirely visible.
Cool, I see.
You want the government to be overthrown and everyone sees the government falling. You just want to retain plausible deniability that you were the one pulling the levers.
Right.
But with clandestine operations, the operation itself is what must remain hidden. The act itself is a secret.
Okay, let me try an analogy to lock this in for you guys listening.
Let's hear it.
A clandestine operation is kind of like an invisible person moving through a crowded room. The goal is simply not to be seen doing the act. So maybe they are picking a pocket or, secretly copying a document on a desk.
Right, no one knows they're even there.
Exactly. You want the act itself to be a total secret. Covert action, on the other hand, is like a puppet master.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Everyone in the room can clearly see the puppet moving. They see the scene being caused, the influence is highly public, but the strings are completely invisible.
Right. No one knows who is standing in the shadows actually pulling those strings.
Is that a fair way to frame what the divine text is saying?
That analogy holds up perfectly, actually, because it perfectly illustrates the difference between tactical concealment and strategic concealment.
Tactical versus strategic.
Right. Clandestine actions rely on tactical concealment. You do that to protect lives, protect your sensitive sources, and protect your intelligence gathering methods.
Because if they see you.
Exactly. If you are, say, tapping a fiber optic cable in a hostile capital somewhere, the very moment the adversary realizes you are there, the intelligence you're gathering becomes completely worthless.
They just stop using the cable.
Exactly. Or they feed you false information.
But wait, what if a clandestine team gets caught? Like, if the invisible person bumps into someone in that crowded room, what actually happens?
Well, in that scenario, the United States government might ultimately have to acknowledge them.
Really?
Yeah. If a military special operations team is captured while conducting a clandestine reconnaissance mission, the U.S. will likely acknowledge, yes, these are American service members.
Why would they do that?
Primarily to ensure they are treated as lawful combatants under the Geneva Conventions. You don't want them treated as spies who can just be executed.
Well, that makes sense.
But covert operations, however, are structurally designed from their very inception to permit plausible deniability forever.
Forever?
Yes. If covert operative is caught, the U.S. government is fully prepared to completely disavow them. We have no idea who this person is.
Wow. The divine text uses the 1953 coup in Iran as kind of the textbook historical example of covert action, right?
Operation Ajax.
Yeah. The Central Intelligence Agency orchestrated the overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh. And the result, there were tanks in the streets, there was a total change in leadership that was incredibly visible to the entire world.
Everyone saw it happen.
But the United States' hand in it, the funding, the orchestration, all of that was meant to be entirely unacknowledged.
Exactly. That is a classic covert action.
On the flip side, if you have a military unit conducting what they call sensitive site exploitation, so sneaking into a compound just to secretly copy a hard drive and leaving without a trace, that is purely clandestine.
Right, because if anyone knew the hard drive was copied, the mission is essentially a failure.
Okay, so that's the difference between the actions themselves. Now, how does this actually map onto the laws governing the military and the intelligence agencies?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Because this is where the Wall article really tears into the conventional wisdom in Washington.
Yeah.
You read a lot in the news about the friction between Title 10 and Title 50.
You do.
It's talked about to the point where it's treated like a zero-sum game.
Right, like they are completely opposed forces.
Anyone who follows national security knows that Title 10 of the U.S. Code governs the Department of Defense, and Title 50 governs the intelligence community.
Right.
The narrative is almost always framed as a strict lane assignment. Soldiers stay in the Title 10 lane. Spies stay in the Title 50 lane. Don't cross the lines.
Right. But Andrew Wall's primary thesis in his article is that this strict dichotomy is a complete myth.
A myth?
It is a total false binary. Title 10 and Title 50 are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are legally designed to be mutually supporting.
Okay, wait. If they're designed to be mutually supporting, where does this perception of a massive firewall come from? Why does everyone think they can't mix?
It mostly comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how authority is actually delegated in the government.
Okay.
The Secretary of Defense holds immense statutory power under both titles.
Really? Both of them?
Yes. People forget that the Department of Defense isn't just infantry divisions and aircraft carriers. It houses massive intelligence components.
Oh, like the National Security Agency.
Exactly. The National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, they all live under the defense umbrella.
How do you think about that?
Right. And the law explicitly directs the Secretary of Defense to collect foreign intelligence. So a military combatant commander can completely legally execute an intelligence operation.
Wow.
And conversely, intelligence operatives frequently support military operations.
So the law actually actively encourages them to overlap and work together.
It relies on it.
Why then does the Wall article spend so much time discussing all this bureaucratic infighting? Wall uses this very specific funny phrase, rice bowls.
Oh, yeah. Rice bowls.
It paints a picture of absolute dysfunction between the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, rice bowls is classic military and government jargon.
What does it actually mean?
It refers to a bureaucrat fiercely guarding their programs, their budget, their personnel, and their jurisdiction. It's turf protection.
Okay, so don't mess with my rice bowl.
Exactly. When agency directors or Pentagon officials complain to Congress about a, quote, Title 10, Title 50 issue, they are almost never talking about a genuine legal roadblock.
But they aren't.
No. They are using the legal titles as a smokescreen to protect their turf.
Give me a practical example of a rice bowl fight. What does that look like on the ground?
Okay, imagine the Department of Defense decides it needs better human intelligence on the ground in a specific volatile region.
Okay.
So they start spinning up their own networks of clandestine informants. They start paying locals.
Makes sense if they're preparing for a military operation.
Right. But the Central Intelligence Agency, watching this happen in what they consider their territory, might suddenly throw a flag and claim the military is encroaching on Title 50 covert action territory.
Claiming it's legal.
Right. But it isn't really a legal objection. The Central Intelligence Agency is worried that the military's massive budget will just totally eclipse their own operations.
Follow the money.
Always. They also worry that military operatives who maybe aren't as trained in espionage might accidentally burn Central Intelligence Agency sources in the field. Or, honestly, they just worry they'll lose their primacy as the president's main intelligence arm.
So it's a fight over resources and prestige. It's just disguised as a debate over high-minded statutory interpretation.
Precisely. And Wall points out that sometimes you also have military purists who want to keep the armed forces completely segregated from the dark arts of espionage.
Right, the people who say, we are soldiers, not spies.
Exactly. They believe military personnel should fight in uniform and leave the shadow wars to the civilian intelligence agencies. They want to protect the honorable reputation of the armed forces.
But again, that is a policy preference. That is not a legal barrier.
Exactly. It's culture, not law.
Which brings us to the actual structural source of this friction. If the operators on the ground, the soldiers and the spies, are actually perfectly legally capable of working together, the gridlock has to be happening higher up the chain.
And it is. The gridlock is overwhelmingly generated by the United States Congress.
Congress.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have an oversight structure that is inherently bifurcated. It creates two entirely different sets of masters for these operations.
Right. Based on the text's military operations, so the Title 10 activities, they're overseen by the Armed Services Committees in the Senate and the House.
Correct.
But intelligence activities and covert actions under Title 50 are overseen by the intelligence committees.
And those two committees have radically different cultures and radically different legal expectations.
How so?
Well, the intelligence committees were formed in the aftermath of all those major intelligence abuses in the 1970s, the Church Committee era.
Right, the big scandals.
So they operate with a mandate of strict proactive oversight. Remember those presidential findings we talked about required for covert action?
Yeah, the pen-to-paper requirement.
The intelligence committees expect to see those. They demand highly granular details about sources, methods, and risks. And they often want it before an operation even launches.
Whereas the Armed Services Committees operate with a totally different lens
Completely different.
because they oversee a multi-billion-dollar war machine.
Yeah.
They're looking at broader military campaigns, massive weapons acquisitions, theater-wide strategies.
Right. They aren't looking at individual informants.
So if a military commander authorizes a secret, clandestine reconnaissance mission just to map an enemy beachhead, they don't generally have to run to the Armed Services Committee for a permission slip beforehand.
No, not at all. They might just brief the committee on the overall progress of the broader campaign, like months later.
That disparity in oversight creates a profound level of suspicion.
It breeds total paranoia.
The intelligence committees are constantly paranoid that the Department of Defense is deliberately classifying its secret operations as Title X military activities simply to avoid having to brief the intelligence committees.
Yes. And let's be honest, they probably are sometimes.
Right. Let me put this in perspective for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Imagine you are managing a highly sensitive, really complex project at work, but you report to two different boards of directors.
Okay, relatable.
Board A demands a detailed written proposal, a risk assessment, and a signature from the CEO before you make a single phone call.
It sounds awful.
Right. But Board B just wants a quarterly PowerPoint showing general progress toward the main goal.
I know which board I'm going to.
Exactly. It doesn't take a master's degree in public administration to guess which board a project manager or, a four-star general is going to try and route their activities through.
The incentive structure heavily favors the Department of Defense trying to keep its operations under the purview of the Armed Services Committees.
Of course it does.
And the intelligence committees know this. So if a special forces team is conducting a clandestine human intelligence operation in some foreign city, meeting with informants, passing cash to the intelligence committees, it looks entirely indistinguishable from a covert operation.
It looks exactly like espionage.
Right. And so the intelligence committees feel it is their statutory duty to know about it.
Okay, so let's take this out of the committee hearing rooms in D.C. and put it on the actual battlefield.
Good idea.
The intersection of these laws is most acute in unconventional warfare. The Wall article provides a very specific doctrinal definition for this, because it isn't just a catch-all term for, weird war.
No, it's very precise.
What is the military's actual doctrinal definition of unconventional warfare?
Doctrinally, unconventional warfare consists of activities conducted to enable a resistance movement or insurgency to coerce, disrupt, or overthrow a government or occupying power.
Okay.
And the absolute critical phrase in that entire definition is that it is conducted by, with, or through an underground auxiliary or guerrilla force.
Yeah, by, with, or through. So we are talking about proxy warfare, surrogate warfare.
Exactly.
We aren't sending the 82nd Airborne to parachute in and take the capital city. We are finding the locals who already want to overthrow the government, and we are just giving them the tools to do it.
And the absolute archetype for this, which is explored in the text, is the United States campaign in Afghanistan immediately following September 11th, 2001.
The very beginning of the war.
Right. The U.S. didn't initially invade with massive conventional divisions. They utilized unconventional warfare.
How did that play out?
Well, Central Intelligence Agency paramilitary officers, specifically the Jawbreaker team operating under Title 50 authorities, flew into the Panjshir Valley. And they literally brought millions of dollars in boxed cash to buy the loyalty of the Northern Alliance warlords.
Just boxes of physical cash.
Yes. And then, days later, Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, operating under Title X authorities, infiltrated and joined them.
So you have civilian intelligence officers and military soldiers living in the same caves.
Yes.
Riding horses alongside indigenous fighters.
Yeah.
Calling in airstrikes from massive B-52 bombers.
It's an incredible visual, isn't it?
It really is. It is the ultimate fusion of military and intelligence power.
Yeah.
But legally, trying to untangle who was doing what under which title must have been an absolute labyrinth.
Legally, yes. But operationally, it was an incredible demonstration of how Title X and Title 50 are mutually supporting. The Central Intelligence Agency had the legal authority and the existing covert networks to make that initial contact and funnel the money. The military had the combat power, the tactical expertise, and the communications gear to actually direct the close air support.
So they needed each other.
Exactly. On the ground, the operatives didn't care whose paycheck was signed under which title. They integrated seamlessly to achieve the mission.
Now, the wall text breaks unconventional warfare down into 7 distinct phases.
Right.
It lists them as preparation, initial contact, infiltration, organization, buildup, employment, and transition.
Yep, the 7 phases.
Looking at the oversight friction we just discussed, it seems to me that the initial contacts and infiltration phases would cause absolute panic in Washington. Am I right?
You are 100% right, because those early phases are essentially intelligence gathering missions conducted in totally non-permissive environments.
Hostile territory.
Right. During initial contact, you have to send operators across a border into a denied area just to assess whether a resistance group is even viable.
Like, do they even have a chance of winning?
Exactly. Are they competent? Are they trustworthy? Will they take our money and then turn on us?
And when a Green Beret sneaks across that border to meet a warlord, they are not wearing a standard-issue camouflage uniform with an American flag patch and a name tape.
No, absolutely not.
They're wearing civilian clothes or local dress, carrying non-standard weapons. They look like locals.
Which is exactly why the friction explodes in Washington. To an Intelligence Committee staffer sitting in a safe room in D.C., an Army soldier in civilian clothes crossing a border to secretly meet a foreign rival leader looks exactly like a spy conducting a covert action.
Right. There is zero visual difference.
None. So the Intelligence Committee demands to know, why weren't we briefed on this covert action? And the military responds, this isn't a covert action at all. It's the preliminary phase of a military campaign. We are just preparing the battlefield.
Which perfectly transitions us to the most fiercely contested term in the entire Divine and Wall texts.
Oh boy. Here we go.
Operational preparation of the environment. The Department of Defense uses this term constantly, and Congress seems to absolutely despise it. What exactly is operational preparation of the environment?
So doctrinally, it is defined as the conduct of activities in potential operational areas to set the conditions for mission execution.
Setting conditions.
Right. It encompasses everything from mapping terrain and establishing safe houses to identifying local fixers and understanding the societal dynamics of a potential combat zone.
Okay, but setting conditions in potential operational areas, that is an incredibly broad mandate.
Very broad.
It basically sounds like it means the military can deploy people anywhere in the world to do almost anything, as long as they can argue a war might happen there someday.
And you have just articulated the exact argument the intelligence committees make.
Really?
Yes. They accuse the military of using operational preparation of the environment as a giant loophole. Congress argues the Pentagon slaps this label on what is clearly clandestine intelligence gathering just to avoid the strict reporting requirements of Title 50.
Wait, hold on. Let me put my senator hat on for a second. If I'm a senator on the Intelligence Committee, that sounds like an unbelievable blank check.
It does.
You're telling me the military can run unacknowledged secret operations in foreign countries using civilian clothes and unmarked cash, and they don't have to get a presidential finding or brief my committee simply because they claim it's preparation.
Yep.
How is that possibly legally defensible?
Well, the legal defense rests on a very specific carve-out within the covert action statute itself.
Oh, there's an exception built into the law.
Yes. When Congress wrote the law defining covert action, they explicitly included exceptions. And the most vital exception for the military is for traditional military activities.
Traditional military activities, okay.
Right. If an action qualifies as a traditional military activity, it is legally exempt from being classified as a covert action.
Meaning no presidential finding?
Yeah.
And no Intelligence Committee jurisdiction.
Correct. So the Wall article outlines the strict parameters that define a traditional military activity. There are 4 main criteria.
Okay, walk me through them.
First, it must be conducted by military personnel.
Simple enough.
Second, it must be under the direction and control of a military commander.
Okay.
Third, it must precede anticipated hostilities or happen during ongoing hostilities.
Anticipated hostilities. That still feels broad.
It is. But the 4th point is the absolute linchpin. The overall role of the United States in the operation must eventually be apparent or publicly acknowledged.
Okay, let's unpack that linchpin. Eventually publicly acknowledged. Let's say the military sends a clandestine team into country X.
All right.
And they are there to secretly map their air defense radar systems and, I don't know, bury caches of weapons in the desert.
A classic preparation mission.
Right. That specific action is entirely secret. The U.S. government will not acknowledge it as happening. But because the military commander intends for this to be the precursor to a massive conventional invasion next year, an invasion the president will eventually hold a press conference about and acknowledge, the secret groundwork qualifies as a traditional military activity.
You've isolated the exact legal mechanism. That is exactly how it works.
Wow.
The preparatory steps, the clandestine infiltration, the mapping of the radars, none of that has to be acknowledged. As long as the overall anticipated military operation is intended to be public, the secret preparation is considered a traditional military activity. It is governed by Title 10 and overseen by the Armed Services Committees.
But consider the reality of geopolitics for a second.
Okay.
What if the diplomatic situation changes? What if we map the radars, we bury the weapons in the desert, and then a peace treaty is signed 6 months later?
It happens all the time.
The invasion is canceled, the public acknowledgement never happens. Does that mean the secret preparation retroactively becomes an illegal, unauthorized covert action?
That is the legal tightrope.
It seems precarious.
It is. The Department of Defense argues that the intent at the time of the operation is what matters. Right. If they reasonably anticipated hostilities when they authorized the preparation, the fact that the geopolitical winds changed later doesn't retroactively make it an illegal covert action.
But you can see why the intelligence committees view this with immense skepticism.
Oh, absolutely. They see the military conducting operations that look exactly like covert action, but hiding behind the promise of some theoretical invasion that may never actually materialize.
It's a system built on classifying operations, not by what the operative is physically doing, but by what the commanding officer's long-term intention is.
Yes.
It's an oversight framework based entirely on subjective intent, which sounds like a nightmare to regulate.
It is a nightmare. And that subjective intent was already difficult enough to parse when we were talking about physical domains.
Right. Soldiers crossing borders carrying weapons.
Exactly. But the Wall article takes this entire legal architecture and applies it to the modern domain of cyberspace.
Oh, wow.
And when you apply these Cold War laws to cyberspace, the friction goes from being a bureaucratic headache to a potential existential crisis.
I can imagine. Because in cyberspace, there is no physical border to cross. There is no distinction between a soldier in uniform and a spy in civilian clothes.
None at all.
How does a legal framework built during the Cold War handle a domain where geography is entirely irrelevant?
Well, it handles it very, very poorly. Wall highlights that the Title 10 and Title 50 debate reaches its absolute peak intensity in cyber operations.
Why is it so much worse there?
The fundamental problem is that the exact same tools, the exact same lines of malicious code, and the exact same keystrokes used to spy on an enemy network are the exact same tools used to destroy that network.
Okay, let's break that down. Cyber exploitation versus cyber attack.
Right. Cyber exploitation is intelligence gathering. It is espionage.
Okay.
You hack into a foreign adversary's server to silently read their emails, map their network architecture, or steal their weapon schematics. Under the U.S. framework, that is an intelligence activity, typically conducted under Title 50 authorities by an agency like the National Security Agency.
So that's the spying.
Yes. Cyber attack, however, is when you cross the threshold into the use of force.
Like blowing something up.
Or breaking a system.
Yeah.
You hack into a network to disrupt, degrade, or destroy data or physical infrastructure. That is a military operation governed by Title 10 authorities.
Okay, let me try to visualize this. If a burglar picks the lock on your front door, sneaks into your house, takes photos of your security system, draws a floor plan, and leaves without touching anything.
Right.
That is exploitation. It's intelligence gathering.
Correct.
But if that same burglar breaks in, takes a sledgehammer to your server rack, and sets the room on fire, that is an attack.
Exactly.
In the physical world, the tools are different. Camera versus a sledgehammer. But in cyberspace, the lockpick, the initial malware infection, looks exactly the same in both scenarios.
And the timeline is where the legal framework truly fractures.
What do you mean?
In the physical world, moving from intelligence gathering to a kinetic attack takes time. You fly the spy plane, you analyze the photos, you task the bomber squadron, they fly over, and they launch the strike. It takes days or weeks.
Right.
In cyberspace, the operative who is quietly reading emails inside an adversary's network, conducting a Title 50 exploitation, can receive a new order, hit the Enter key, and transition into a Title 10 cyber attack that deletes the entire server in a matter of milliseconds.
Just one keystroke.
One keystroke. The wall text brings up Stuxnet as the ultimate case study for this.
The Stuxnet computer worm.
Yes, Stuxnet is the paradigm-shifting event in cyber warfare. It was a highly sophisticated, multi-layered cyber weapon deployed against Iran's nuclear facilities at Natanz.
What was its actual target?
The target was the programmable logic controllers, basically the industrial computers, that regulated the spin speeds of the uranium enrichment centrifuges.
But wait, the Nathan's facility was air-gapped, right? Like it wasn't connected to the public internet at all.
Exactly. It was completely isolated.
Which means just getting the malware into the facility in the first place required an extraordinary intelligence operation.
Oh, massive. It required human intelligence, perhaps agents on the ground with physical thumb drives.
Wow.
And it required massive cyber exploitation. Think about it. Months or even years of Title 50 intelligence gathering just to understand the proprietary layout of the Iranian network and the specific software running those exact centrifuges.
Right, you have to map the house before you can burn it down.
Exactly. So they conduct all this exploitation under Title 50. But the payload of Stuxnet wasn't just to watch the centrifuges spin, it was designed to physically destroy them.
How did it do that?
It subtly and maliciously altered the frequencies of the power supply to the centrifuges. This caused them to spin out of control and physically tear themselves apart.
That's terrifying.
And the most devious part, it did all of this while feeding loopback data to the Iranian scientists' monitors, telling them everything was operating perfectly smoothly.
So they had no idea it was happening until the machines literally broke.
Right. It was a cyber attack that resulted in kinetic physical destruction, a pure military use of force under Title 10.
So in a single piece of software, you have a requirement for deep Title 50 intelligence gathering seamlessly married to a Title 10 destructive military attack.
Yes.
How does the government's organizational chart even handle an operation that spans both titles simultaneously?
Well, the government basically realized the old stovepipes couldn't survive this new reality.
They had to adapt.
Yes. This is exactly why the United States established United States Cyber Command as a unified combatant command.
Okay.
But the crucial, highly controversial decision they made was the leadership structure. The government dual-hatted the command.
Dual-hatted, meaning one person has two jobs.
Exactly. The exact same person who serves as the director of the National Security Agency, which is a Title 50 intelligence entity, simultaneously serves as the commander of United States Cyber Command, which is a Title 10 military warfighting entity.
You're telling me one single person sits at the very top of both pyramids?
Yes.
They can authorize the spy to pick the lock and in the exact same breath authorize the soldier to drop the sledgehammer.
It is an absolute operational necessity. In the cyber domain, you simply cannot functionally separate the intelligence gatherer from the warfighter.
Right, because they're using the same networks.
The hacker deploying the destructive payload relies entirely on the vulnerabilities discovered by the intelligence operative. Frequently, they are literally the same person sitting at the same computer terminal.
Oh, wow.
By putting one commander in charge of both agencies, the executive branch effectively acknowledged that the strict Title 10 versus Title 50 dichotomy is dead in cyberspace. It just doesn't work.
But that dual hat structure must cause the congressional oversight committees to completely lose their minds.
Oh, it generates intense friction. During congressional hearings, you will see senators from the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee pressing the commander, desperately trying to untangle the authorities.
What do they ask?
They will ask things like, when your operators penetrated that server, were they operating under Title 10 or Title 50?
And what's the answer?
The reality is, the operator was likely using Title 50 intelligence to navigate the network in order to emplace a Title 10 cyber weapon for future use. It's both.
It's like asking water to separate back into hydrogen and oxygen after you've already swallowed it.
That's a great way to put it.
The legal framework demands a distinction that the operational reality simply cannot accommodate anymore.
And that really is the overarching theme of both the Divine Report and the Wall article. We have constructed this intricate, massive legal bureaucracy based on the assumption that intelligence activities and military operations are distinct, separable phenomena.
But they aren't.
No, they haven't been for a long time.
So to synthesize all of this for you, the listener, the master's level takeaway here isn't just memorizing the definition of covert action versus clandestine operations.
Right, it's bigger than definitions.
It is understanding that the perceived firewall between military operations and intelligence activities, the infamous Title 10 versus Title 50 debate, is an illusion.
It is an illusion maintained largely by bureaucratic inertia. The laws themselves were drafted to overlap.
Right.
They're designed to give the executive branch the flexibility to use both its special operations forces and its intelligence communities seamlessly, whether they are funding proxies in the Panjshir Valley or injecting malicious code into a nuclear facility.
The friction doesn't come from the law forbidding cooperation. The friction comes from the rice bowls.
The turf wars.
Exactly. It comes from intelligence agencies fighting for their budget share, military commanders pushing the boundaries of operational preparation of the environment, and congressional committees fiercely guarding their jurisdiction over who gets to be briefed on the big secrets.
Exactly. As long as the United States maintains a bifurcated oversight structure where one committee polices the spies and another committee polices the soldiers, the operators out in the field will constantly be caught in the middle. They will be forced to play semantic games just to satisfy Washington.
It really forces you to look at every international headline differently.
Oh, for sure.
When you read about a mysterious explosion at a foreign munitions plant, or a sudden, well-funded uprising in a hostile state, you start to realize the sheer legal gymnastics happening behind the curtain to make that possible.
The paperwork behind the explosion is probably thicker than the bomb manual.
Right. But I want to circle back to your point about cyberspace, because I think it forces us toward a really unsettling conclusion about the future of this entire legal framework.
The source material drives us right to the edge of this problem. Look, we built these oversight structures, the presidential findings, the Gang of Eight briefings, the Armed Services Committee hearings. We built all of that during the Cold War.
Right. A totally different era.
An era where deploying force meant mobilizing ships, looting bombers, and physically sending human beings across physical borders. That process inherently took time.
Days or weeks.
Exactly. And time allowed for lawyers to sit in a room and debate Title 10 versus Title 50. It allowed for committees to convene and be briefed.
But cyberspace evaporates time.
Completely. It reduces the decision cycle to milliseconds. Think about this. If a sophisticated adversary launches an autonomous cyber attack against U.S. critical infrastructure, the defense might rely on automated algorithms to instantly identify the origin of the attack.
Okay.
Then, that algorithm might exploit the adversary's network to confirm the source and immediately execute a destructive counterstrike to neutralize the threat.
An algorithm identifying the threat, conducting the Title 50 exploitation to map the enemy server, and launching the Title 10 retaliatory strike.
Yes.
All in the time it takes a human being to blink.
Exactly. So the really provocative question we are left with is this. In an era of instantaneous automated cyber warfare and global proxy-driven unconventional warfare, can a mid-20th century oversight system possibly survive?
I mean, how could it?
Right. When the transition from intelligence gathering to destructive force happens in a fraction of a second, driven by code rather than commanders, who is actually left to determine whether it was a military action or an intelligence operation.
An automated counterstrike is executing across the globe while the committees in Washington are still arguing over who has the jurisdiction to read the act-or-action report.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
That is a deeply chilling reality to consider. Well, we always try to speak clearly and break down these complex master's-level topics for you, and today was certainly no exception. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into unconventional warfare. Keep analyzing the structures that govern the shadows, because the deeper you look, the more you realize the rulebook is constantly being rewritten in the dark.